Imagine a regular Western teenager from the 90s. The kid plays basketball, goes crazy for the Chicago Bulls, and worships Michael Jordan. He attends elite schools in Switzerland, takes regular trips to Disneyland, speaks several languages fluently, and enjoys every advantage of modern Western life. To his friends and classmates, he's just pack-on. Now imagine that this quiet, smart young man one day ends up in charge of a small country. He promises to make life better for ordinary people, launches huge construction projects, and soon the whole world learns his real name, Kim Jong Un. He builds a strong nuclear shield for his country and absolute, unlimited power for himself. To keep that power, he's willing to do whatever it takes. Eliminate his own uncle and any possible opposition, seal the borders completely, and cut his people off from any information about the outside world, the very same world where he basically grew up and was shaped. Today, North Korea remains one of the most closed-off places on the planet. It's almost impossible to escape. But even the few who manage to flee often still feel a strange pride in their homeland. Why does a country that has lived under heavy sanctions for years and sometimes can't even feed its own population spend enormous resources on building nuclear weapons? Why didn't the regime in North Korea collapse like the Soviet Union or the Eastern European socialist countries? But at the same time, why didn't it open its doors to Western investors like China and Vietnam did? And the biggest question, how have Kim Jong Un and his predecessors managed to keep absolute control over 25 million people for decades? So completely that many North Koreans don't even remember a time when their country was ruled by anyone outside of one single family. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea has existed for almost 75 years now. That's 5 years longer than the Soviet Union lasted. But notice the key difference. In the USSR, 7 different people led the country during that time. People who, to put it mildly, were not related. In North Korea, power has stayed with just 3 men the entire time. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un. And as you can guess from the last name, they are grandfather, father, and son. It quickly becomes clear that North Korea is not about communism, not about the power of the people, and not even about the ruling party. This is a classic personal regime of one specific family that has kept a country of millions in an iron grip for 3 generations. Let's rewind history 70 years. American planes literally wiped the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang, off the map. The numbers may sound dry, but trust me, they're horrifying. In just 3 years of the Korean War, around 200,000 bombs were dropped on Pyongyang alone, roughly 1 bomb for every resident of the city at that time. Curtis LeMay, the commander of U.S. Strategic Aviation, later admitted that his pilots burned down practically every house in North Korea. He then complained that he no longer had any worthwhile targets left to bomb. Besides residential areas, dams were destroyed, rivers overflowed their banks, flooding fields and wiping out crops across the entire north of the country. Of course, many people today will say, wait a minute, North Korea attacked South Korea first. If the Americans and their allies hadn't stepped in, Kim Il-sung could very well have taken over the whole peninsula. And that's true. Let's quickly remember how it all started. After World War II, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. The North went to the Communists, the South to pro-Western forces. On June 25, 1950, North Korean troops suddenly invaded the South and quickly captured almost 90% of South Korean territory, leaving the South Koreans only a small foothold near the port of Busan. American troops, supported by the UN, came to help, launched a counteroffensive, and nearly reached the Chinese border themselves, destroying everything in their path. Neither China nor the Soviet Union wanted American troops right on their doorstep. They intervened, and by 1951 the front line had returned roughly to where it started, the 38th parallel. In 1953, exhausted, both sides signed an armistice. Since then, 2 separate Koreas have existed on the map. All these years, South Korea has been actively supported, and still is, by the United States with money, technology, and a military umbrella. North Korea was propped up first by the Soviet Union and China. Until 1994, North Korea was ruled by one man, Kim Il-sung. He went from military leader to great leader, and took it much further than even Stalin. North Korean propaganda raised him almost to divine status, the son of the nation. How did he manage it? Remember those terrible bombings when people hid in underground shelters? It's hard to call that a victory, but that's exactly what Kim Il-sung called it. Among the ruins of his capital, he held a military parade and celebrated the triumph of the Fatherland Liberation War, the very war he himself had started by attacking his neighbor. Luckily for him, the Soviet Union was willing to pay generously for a loyal ally. Engineers, architects, and specialists from socialist countries poured into Korea. The country recovered quickly and even developed faster than its southern neighbor in the early years. Kim Il-sung's authority grew along with the new neighborhoods of Pyongyang. The rebuilt city looked a lot like East Berlin or Moscow. While people admired these changes, Kim quietly got rid of any opposition and built a powerful cult of personality around himself as the father of the nation. One of the most effective tricks in propaganda, and it always works, is showing care for children. During the war, Pyongyang and the whole country lost about 1 million people out of a population of 10 million. Imagine how many orphans that left behind. Kim Il-sung ordered the construction of special orphanages and schools for children of heroes who fell for the homeland. The orphans were fed, clothed, and educated. But from a very young age they were taught that their real father was now the great leader himself. The most famous is Mangyongdae School. It was built on the site of Kim Il-sung's birthplace. Its graduates became the future elite of the army and secret services. In this way, the leader literally grew his own support base for decades to come. Today, the regime also relies on modern technology. Just 10 years ago, South Korea recorded up to 1.5 million cyber attacks from North Korea every hour. That's about 17 hacking attempts per second. Between 2016 and 2018, North Korean hackers stole more than $1 billion from crypto exchanges around the world. Even in such an isolated country, they found talented programmers willing to work for the regime. Now look at those bright mosaics, statues, and posters. In them, Kim Il-sung appears not just as a father, but as a caring mother. He gently hugs children, wounded soldiers, farmers, and old people. This is no accident. This is exactly how cults and religions are built. They try to replace the family. And here it worked perfectly. By the way, an interesting fact, Kim Il-sung's father was a schoolteacher, and his mother was the daughter of a school principal. Both were active Christians in Eastern Korea. And Kim Il-sung himself in his youth admired Stalin, who, by the way, had also studied to be a priest. Both men understood perfectly how the machinery of absolute power and religious worship works. But let's get back to why the regime tries so hard to replace the family. Family means care and security. And security in the face of constant external threat requires serious weapons. After those horrific bombings, Kim Il-sung understood clearly. The Americans could repeat Hiroshima and Nagasaki at any moment. Nuclear threats, by the way, were a big reason both sides finally ended the war in 1953. So he sent scientists to study at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna, near Moscow. There, together with colleagues from other socialist countries, they gained knowledge. And in 1964, with help from the USSR, North Korea got its own nuclear center and even its first Soviet reactor. But a real bomb was still far away. After the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, Pyongyang finally realized allies could abandon them at any moment if it suited Moscow. From then on, North Korea decided to rely only on itself. The share of military spending in the budget jumped sharply, from 4.5% in 1956 to 30% just 10 years later. People who had survived war and destruction began to see Kim Il-sung almost as a saint. He had defended the country, won the war, united the people, and at least partly fed them. New hospitals and schools appeared in Pyongyang. It really seemed like a socialist paradise was being built. But then things got much harder. In 1994, Kim Il-sung died. The Soviet Union had collapsed. China was turning toward the market. Aid dropped sharply. Then came the terrible famine of the 1990s, the arduous march, as the official propaganda calls it. And this is where the regime showed its true resilience. Even during the famine, when people were eating grass and tree bark, the Kims did not lose power. In those years, the UN began sending humanitarian aid. The irony is that the main donors were the United States and South Korea, their biggest enemies. But even that wasn't enough. The government had to make concessions. It allowed small private trading. Jiangmadang, makeshift markets, appeared, and smuggling flourished. State enterprises stood idle, but men still went there out of habit. Women became the real breadwinners of the family. By tradition, they were supposed to stay home, but hunger forced them out into the markets to trade. That's how private business began to emerge from the bottom up in North Korea. However, letting the economy go uncontrolled was dangerous. The regime could end up like the USSR. So Kim Jong Il, who came to power after his father's death, made a brilliant move. He announced the Sun Gun policy, military first. There were two reasons. First, North Korea has more soldiers than Russia, even though its population is 5 times smaller. If the army became unhappy, it could easily overthrow the government. They already had the weapons in their hands. Second, Kim Jong-il urgently needed to build his own authority. He had no combat experience like his father. Before that, he had only worked in propaganda. To keep the military from eating him, he sharply increased their funding and gave them priority access to food, fuel, and privileges. The nuclear program also became part of this strategy. The Kims remembered very well what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. As soon as he gave up weapons of mass destruction, NATO quickly helped remove him. Nobody in Pyongyang is planning to use nuclear weapons first today. That would be suicide. But having missiles that can reach the United States is the strongest possible argument to keep Washington from interfering in North Korea's internal affairs. Plus, for domestic propaganda, it's the perfect tool. Look, we've become such a powerful country that we can threaten our biggest enemy. Overall, any long-lasting regime rests on 3 pillars: support, or at least loyalty, from ordinary people through constant propaganda. Enemies are all around us. Only the leaders can protect us. A strong and satisfied army. A group of people who benefit greatly from the current system. The last point is the most interesting. In North Korea, this beneficiary class also exists. They're called tunju, money masters. These are high-ranking Workers' Party officials, generals, heads of state companies, people who do business abroad, bring in foreign currency, or simply trade skillfully on the domestic markets. This includes security forces and the very same women who pulled their families through the famine in the 90s. Today, these people live noticeably better than most of the population. They earn and spend real dollars, drive decent cars, and vacation at domestic resorts. Under Kim Jong Un, modern ski resorts and entertainment centers have appeared in the country. Western clothes and gadgets aren't flooding in, but they're arriving in a noticeable stream. These tunju hold tightly to the current power because it gives them everything. If the regime collapses, their factories and businesses won't survive competition from Hyundai, Samsung, or Chinese giants. They remember very well how giant factories in the Soviet Union turned into ruins after it fell apart. Take North Korea's automobile industry, for example. They assemble copies of Western and Chinese models. The owner of such a factory can make good money, especially if he knows how to solve problems. If the Iron Curtain disappears, that business is finished. Or take the state airline Air Koryo. From the outside, it flies old planes and is considered one of the worst in the world. But inside the country, this organization owns taxis, gas stations, a travel agency, and produces cigarettes and canned goods. It's classic state-private partnership. The regime sheds operational headaches but keeps strict control and takes the lion's share of the profits. According to South Korean intelligence, Kim Jong Un himself has about 33 luxury residences. Almost every one has its own train station, underground bunkers, and multi-layered security. The leadership is ready for any scenario. In 2018, Donald Trump tried to tempt Kim during their personal meeting. He showed him photos and basically said, "We can turn your country into a second South Korea, or even better. Money, investments, technology, it'll all be there. Pyongyang could become like Miami. Or do it like China. The party stays in power, but the economy becomes capitalist. Or like Japan, you stay as a symbolic figure like the emperor. Just give up the missiles." The offer looked very tempting. Many dictators would have taken the bait. But Kim Jong Un refused. He already has everything he needs for a comfortable life. And most importantly, nuclear weapons give him real security. Without them, he would face the fate of Gaddafi or Saddam. With them, nobody will take the risk. Kim Jong Un was born in 1982. By the time the Soviet Union fell, he was already 9 years old. He clearly remembered how communist regimes collapsed. Plus his years of study in Switzerland. He saw the Western world from the inside and understands its rules perfectly. When he first came to power, Washington tried basketball diplomacy. They wanted to send Michael Jordan himself, but he refused. In the end, Dennis Rodman went, a guy who was never afraid of weird adventures. He flew to Pyongyang several times, played basketball with Kim, drank with him, and even sang happy birthday songs. It was a bright show for the press, but in reality empty PR. Neither side was ready to make serious concessions. So why does the Kim regime still stand? Because they do everything right and very consistently. They eliminated all internal rivals. They created a powerful ideology that has worked for decades. They built a real nuclear shield. They grew a small but very influential group of people who have a personal stake in keeping the system alive. This is the classic formula for a long-lasting dictatorship. Deng Xiaoping once said, "Let some people get rich first." China went further and gradually lifted everyone. The talent of the Kims is that they stopped at the first stage. Those who already have money must be constantly reminded that they will lose everything without the regime. And the rest, keep them from starving, but don't let them really rise up and start thinking about change. In the end, North Korea remains a unique example. A country that survived bombings, famine, and the collapse of its allies, yet still kept power in the hands of one family for 3 generations in a row. This is no accident. It's a very well thought out, harsh, and unfortunately effective system.